All right, we are at the top of the hour, so I think we'll go ahead and get started as people come in. Welcome to our session today. We are happy to have you join us. I'm Vicki Stewart. I'm Executive Director of Employment Disability Resources. So I serve businesses in the Sioux Falls and surrounding communities.
I'm Heidi Meekum. I work with Workplace Disability Network of the Black Hills, and I serve 9 counties on the western side of South Dakota. And so welcome everyone. Today we are exploring employment outcomes for autistic adults. Specifically, why is there such a gap between ability and opportunity and what can be done about it? And Vicki, would you like to introduce our guest for the day?
Yes, I am happy to introduce Brittany Schmidt. Brittany is with Autism Behavioral Consulting in Sioux Falls. She provides information and supports to the autistic community that she is lucky enough to have been involved with for 38 years. Social thinking, diagnostics, and ASD training are key components of her professional life. I've known Brittany for many, many years, and it's a pleasure to work with her and have her as a colleague. So, Brittany, let's just get started with, can you give us a brief overview of what Autism Behavioral Consulting is and maybe your background in working with autistic individuals?
Sure. So I think most people in the state know me from when I was the director of the autism program at the USD Center for Disabilities. And I started there in 1998, and I was there until 2009. And then fast forward to 2005, when I left in 2009 to start Autism Behavioral Consulting, I continued doing and being a part of their interdisciplinary autism diagnostic team. So I just completely ended with this and the Land Clinic. I just completely ended with USD Center for Disabilities last June. So this feels kind of weird, honestly, but I'm so grateful for that opportunity. And through that process, I learned what I know and what I thought I knew, and what I want to do with my career. And one of the things that was really, really important to me was training for pre-professional practice and working with autistic individuals. And I found that to be a really good marriage because it's hard to talk the talk if you're not walking the walk. Right. And so I found myself kind of getting into a lull when I was not working directly with individuals from about 2005 to 2009. So started Autism Behavioral Consulting, have never looked back. My licensure is due in October, and they tell me that you're not fully retired until you let your licensure lapse. So I'm going to renew. So anyway, so that's a little bit about me. I see children and young adults and adults. My age range right now he's 6 yesterday, 6 until my oldest guy right now, 30-ish, something like that. And I do primarily social thinking, which is teaching teaching people that others have thoughts, feelings, and ideas, and how to react and interact under the conditions of the environment. So that is the quickest I've ever done social thinking, just so you know.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Brittany. So one thing, we work with employers, so a lot of employers love data. They love hearing us say 1 in 4, 25%, those statistics. So when it comes to autistic adults, the range is about 40% to as high as 85%. These are adults that could be in the workforce, and yet only 14% of those adults work full-time compared to about 80% of neurotypical adults. Really love stats here. Even when employed, only about 51% or around 51% seem to be working below their skill or educational level. And the challenges start early, like autistic young adults will either work only part-time or not at all in their early 20s. When you take all of this data and information, what does it suggest about the relationship between education and employment outcomes for autistic adults?
Yeah, yeah. So a couple things I want to say about that is increasing education does not equate to increasing employment. The numbers you just said, the numbers you just talked about, are reflective of that. And there's a lot of individuals who are really good at school, autistic individuals who are really good at school, the structure of school, the passion of their areas of interest, et cetera, allow them and afford them the significant ability to be good students. There's challenges with being a student, executive functioning being one of the primary challenges, group dynamics, those kinds of things are challenging with schooling for individuals with autism. But it doesn't necessarily mean advanced degrees equate to improvement in employment outcomes. Okay. The other thing that I want to say here is there's some really good research from a man named Paul Wehman. It's Wehman out of Virginia Commonwealth University. I think that's right, VCU. That is very clear that the single most the greatest predictor of outcome for autistic adults is employment as autistic adolescents. Okay, so that could be a volunteer job. It could be a paid job. It could be a job, whatever, working, showing up and working is the greatest predictor of adult success in autistic individuals. So one of the things that just happened is I'm getting ready for summer, as we all are, I think. And I just put out, hey, this is what's happening in social thinking land, for summer. And I said, caveat, if your child is 14, 15 and or older, employment is your first priority this summer, right? Because we know that those skill sets transcend and improve adult outcomes. So did I answer your question?
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely
yeah.
does. So, what trends are visible that you can see in early career experiences for autistic young adults? You said volunteerism, but is there any, like, when they do actually get into a career experience, are there any trends that you're seeing with these young adults?
Trends in terms of positive or trends? What do you think? Tell me a little bit
Just
more.
like career experiences, early career experiences.
I'm really not sure how to answer that question, but I will say that the the executive functioning skills, when the individual is supported to recognize, how do I show up on time? How do I greet people? And not just, hello, how are you? Because that's weird. No one does that anymore. You know what I mean? But how to professionally greet people, how to be thinking about the relationship aspects. I think those things are not well discussed. It's how you, like, they talk about how you do the job. This is how you do this part, these aspects of the work, whatever the work is, right? But it's the things that are underneath the work that almost always are the reason for a firing or a no longer putting shifts on the schedule. Those kinds of things. I hear it over and over again, where a young person will say, well, I used to work 20 hours a week and now I'm only working 4. Well, you can't make a living on 4 hours a week, right? It's making a living on 20 hours a week, right? But they'll say, I don't know why, right? And then it becomes very self-reflective. So
how is underemployment impacting these individuals and employers when they're working below their skill level? Do you see
yeah. Well, it's just like anybody, you work hard to get the education or get the, work hard on whatever it is you're working hard on. And then when employment doesn't follow, then, what happens to our self-esteem? It's the same thing for autistic individuals. Self-esteem goes down, self-worth, and then increase in mental health. And then we have this pretty unfortunate cycle. Unfortunate is really not the right word. I can't think of the right word right now.
Doing great.
Debilitating.
Yeah, very interesting.
Mhm.
All right, let's dig a little deeper here now, Brittany. What aspects of a typical hiring process could unintentionally be barriers for autistic candidates? What are some of those barriers that you see in an employment, especially hiring?
Yeah. So when I think about this, I think about if I'm going into an interview, what am I most concerned about? Right? I mean, just for my own person, right? Like, okay, so I want to make sure they know what I know, that I'm well spoken, that I can form ideas and be creative and passionate, right? So I'm thinking about that from my point of view. And then I think about, okay, so that's really about social communication and knowing when to give and when to take. Okay. That is a natural part of the interview process. And now let's think about if it's more than one person in an interview process, right? So now I have to coordinate looking towards or looking, at, because culturally eye contact in our society it's differing. It differs depending on where we are, but eye contact is a sign of honesty in many cultural aspects of an interview. But how much eye contact and how long and where to look, those kinds of things. And I'm not a big believer in teaching eye contact at all, but I'm a big believer in teaching faking it, right? So you can look at the cheekbone, or like right at the eyeglass level or right between the eyes, like right where my wrinkles are, and get away with quite a bit, right? And you also are recognizing how to, kind of grab and go, grab it and then move on, grab it and then move on. So those kinds of things, but it's not something that is really well taught. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does. So that's where the social thinking comes into play, I imagine.
Well, it's social thinking, but it's also just how to react and interact, and thinking about, how long to talk. And, when someone says, what are your strengths? What does that say? If you're a very literal, concrete, analytical thinker, you're saying, well, I can bench 240 and I'm really creative. And my mom says I'm good at doing dishes. What are your strengths mean?
Yeah,
Right?
that's a good point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's huge. So with some of those early employment gaps, how does that really impact lifetime career opportunities?
Again, it's just like anybody, the longer you're in the workforce, the more ready you are for retirement, right? And thinking about what those practices are to get from point A to point B to point C, right? And, just the end game, we don't know. Again, back to executive functioning, impulse control is a pretty significant challenge for most of the people that I work with. And, thinking about what money really means, money management, money understanding, and balancing the, ooh, I really like this shiny object, whatever it is. And I'll struggle with this, don't get me wrong, you know what I mean? But inherent to autistic individuals is that impulse control. And so then what does that mean long term? And what is where's the learning around that, or where's the teaching around that?
Great.
So Vicki and I, working with employers, we come across a lot of stuff, a lot of concerns employers have or hesitations. So when it comes to an autistic individual, why might employers be hesitant to bring them onto the workforce versus somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, I just think about it, if we're talking about an educator or an employer, or, even a coworker, I watch people, who I know have autism. I know that's the wrong thing to say, but and I'm like, I wonder how they're being accommodated for, and I like to see how different employer or different coworkers work, with individuals too. It's fun. It's fun for me to think about how we just have some natural supports in many, many job settings that we're not tapping. I wanted to say that because I think it's very, very true just from my non-scientific observations. But I think employers are worried about accommodations. They're worried about what that looks like. How much am I going to have to do in order to have this employee in my business? And, honestly, I think about the accommodations that I have to make when people come into my office or whatever, and they'll tell you what their accommodations are one way or another. If you're listening, they will tell you, right? And so some of the things that I've had to be thinking about is keeping things visually clear, keeping the boundaries of supervision very clear, and I do that in writing, and keeping the boundaries of expectations very clear. And those three things, if you do those things proactively and in communication with the individual, it doesn't take long, and you've got a pretty well-oiled machine. Right. The other thing is to build the relationship with the person. Now, I'm not saying, go out and do karaoke. I'm saying, doing, I don't know why I said that. I hate karaoke. Anyway, some people love it, right? Not me. Anyway, but like you're saying, okay, so, hey, what'd you do this weekend? What are some things that are your passions, right? And once you get that person talking about their passions, it's just like anybody. People like to talk about what they love. Yeah. And it doesn't have to, there's a process called the 2x10 approach. And I utilize it when kids are being very challenging in whatever situation they're in. And it's usually because no one has done the work of forming a relationship. So the 2x10 approach is where you take 2 minutes for 10 days and you talk about only what they want to talk about. Okay. So it could, whatever the topic is. And it's for those situations where the person doesn't feel heard or appreciated. This just probably 3 weeks ago, I had a young man sitting right there in my chair, and one of the chairs in my office. And he said, I feel most loved when people listen to me talk.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the boy can talk. Yes. Right. And so young man, he's not a boy, he's a young man. And it just really struck home with me. If you have all these things in your head and no one is listening to you and just saying, doot, 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 what happens when things go poorly? Or what happens when things go well? So anyway.
Wow, that's great. I've never heard of that before. So very helpful, practical information that we can all use, I think. You talked earlier about strengths. That's typically an interview question, right? What are your strengths? With autistic individuals, they do bring strengths that are really valuable in the workplace. What strengths do you think come to mind?
Yeah, really strong analytical skills, like we talked about, very good logical reasoning skills. And I can guarantee you, individuals who have autism are probably 6 steps ahead of you. Right? And think about how boring that is if you have to wait for other people to catch up. Right. I experience that. I have an adult group on Monday nights, and I experience it every week. And I always just like, okay, dude, sorry, you got it. I'm almost there, and I just let them know that I know they're ahead of me, and letting them know that they're the teacher is helpful too for that thing. So really high levels of focus, very accurate workers, very like attention to detail. So seeing things that other people don't see, and how that is a real strength as it applies to really any job. I mean, I can't think of any job where attention to detail isn't important, and what that brings to the productivity of the output, right? So if I'm a person who has high levels of focus, strong attention to detail, and I'm accurate, holy guacamole. You know what I mean? That really improves productivity and performance for so many tasks. It doesn't matter what it is. I mean, writing a report, if I just think about my own job, if I had high levels of focus, attention to detail, and persistence, man, I'd work a lot faster.
I know we work with a bank here in town,
Hmm.
and they've hired someone, a young man with autism, and the CEO shares how he has saved them hundreds of thousands of dollars. He works in the fraud department,
I
and
know that
little
individual.
details. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So little details that
Yep.
others would have missed, he
Mhm.
caught and saved the bank hundreds of
Yep.
thousands of dollars.
Yep. Seeing patterns, seeing inaccuracies. Yeah, really cool. Yeah, if a person with autism ever says to you, you're wrong, meaning like that's not what you said, they're right. Because the memory is so awesome.
How do you think businesses can really tap into those strengths more?
Um, that is a good question. Okay, so I guess I would be looking at what my product is, right? And I would be looking at what is the match, and it's not unlike any hiring. So like when I used to be at the Center for Disabilities and I was hiring, is one of the reasons I left is because I hated hiring. And like what is that called? Employee management. Ugh, didn't like any part of it, right? And so but when I was hiring and I was thinking about what the job was, I would be thinking about how I can match the skill sets of this individual with this output, right? So I know that this individual was not the strongest one to do this job, but they rocked at this job. Does that make sense? And so I would really be thinking about, okay, so I have an individual who has a strong visual memory. I have an individual who has attention to detail, is very focused. However, really be thinking about focus as it applies to passion versus focus as it applies to the job. Right? And so if the job isn't passion based, meaning like area of interest, those kinds of things, I would be really looking at how I can balance focused work with time away from the work. Does that make sense? And that's what I talked about with the supervisional boundaries, right? So the rule is you can't have your phone on during XYZ task, right? Because XYZ task is what is the goal at this point in time. So by making a visual schedule, so like, yeah, you're going to go on break at 10:15 or, at lunchtime or when you leave your desk or whatever the job is. I don't know what the job is, right? Whenever you leave your job, that's when you can access those things that are passion driven, right? And putting the boundaries on that. Another thing that I have young adults and old adults say to me is, I don't want to do this because it's misusing my time, right? And what they mean by that is you're taking me away from my passion. Right. And what they then are lacking or struggling with is what I call miming time. So recognizing what time really is. Okay. The best way to do that is not on a digital clock, it's on an analog clock. Because you can show passage of time on an analog clock. You want me to get my clock and just show you
Sure.
what I mean by this? Okay.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh, we are almost out of time. Holy guacamole. See, I told you I'm not feeling very well, and I told him, I said, I'm gonna just rock this out. I know I can do it. Okay, so here's my clock and here's my dry erase marker. It has a plastic top. If I'm gonna mime time for use of work versus passion, I'm gonna do something like, can you see it okay if I draw that dot right there?
Yeah.
Okay, so right now we're gonna work from here, and I'm just gonna do an hour. We're gonna go all the way around. Okay, that means we have 5, 10. These are not, I'm not lining up very well because I'm at an angle. 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60. All of this time is going to be when you're expected to be off your phone.
Very visual.
Does that make sense? And then when it's time for break, you just say, okay, we're going to have a break from here to here. And then I write what it is that they might want to do. I wrote phone there. Does that make sense? And then the other part of this is I'll go like, if this is break time, then what I'll do is I'll say, this is when cleanup starts. That just means I have to shift my focus. Right? And so I'll say things like, what do you see future Brittany doing in 10 minutes, in 15 minutes? Well, I'm going to close out of my apps. I'm going to put my phone into my pocket. I'm going to stand up. I'm going to walk. I'm going to go to the bathroom. And then I'm going to go back to wherever it is that I'm supposed to be. And I don't know if you saw, but I was using gestures. That helps a lot with miming time. Because if you can use the gestures, you're prepping yourself to do the work. That is not what this topic is about. However, it works.
Great information.
Right.
I'm forever listening to everything you're telling us, but me and Vicki have had an opportunity to ask a lot of questions and we're coming close, but I want to see if there's anyone in our session that has any questions for you as well, in case we've not covered something that they're curious about. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the question if you'd like.
I guess I don't have a question per se, but you just blew my mind with the clock thing. That is a remarkable tool and method. Because not everybody, we all learn different, right? So and some folks like me, if I see it once, I do it once with my hands, I got it. I can read a book all day, couldn't tell you how to do it in the end. But no, I really like that method and that strategy, and it really breaks it down. And another thing that spoke with me is the passion part, being on a phone is probably not passion, but the young people really like it because they just like that social aspect of it or whatever and whatnot. So it's good to have those boundaries and like you said, those expectations and the three things that you put up at the beginning, which is very good. And like you said, even with the clients that I work with, you have those expectations, within a week, 2 weeks, we all understand it and we're all just kind of pointing towards the same direction. So no, it's very powerful stuff.
Yeah, I didn't get at a lot of it so that we wanted to talk about today, so I'm sorry. So I
No,
appreciate
that's okay.
You covered everything, really. You did great.
it. Well, it's fine. It is what it is. But
Yeah.
yeah. I have a question for you guys. What are when you think of autistic individuals being employed, what kind of comments are you getting back from employers about the good, the bad, and the ugly? Because that will help me too, as I'm trying to talk to all my 14 and uppers about employment.
I would say for me, a lot of a couple of the businesses I've worked with who have an individual with autism working for them, it's a positive. Everything I hear back is usually been a positive experience. They see them as very smart. They can grab onto details and facts and information. Just different information like that, but for the most part, it's always been a positive. We really enjoy working with that individual.
Good.
Yeah, I hear a lot of positive too, like the attention to detail.
Yeah.
Like the toy lending library comes to my mind. Someone they employ, again, she was talking about how they have several employees and no one else caught this detail. But the autistic individual did. I've also heard comments like about, well, what kind of job would an autistic person do? And, when we have to help them think, every person with autism is different, and we don't have to put them in just one job. They all have different skills and interests. And so just kind of broadening that perspective, I think, of employers.
Yeah. I always think, what kind of job would a Brittany do? Well, if well, a Brittany wanted to be a ballerina when she was 8. You know what I mean? I mean, what kind of jobs would a person do? Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? That point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say that there have been the rare occasion where maybe some stereotypes from the past that have been created through Hollywood and whatnot, that they have occasionally come up, like, oh, if they're autistic, then they'd be really, it's like, let's back that up and get past the biases and the myths, and let's talk about what this person and this individual actually is. And, reminding them this is an individual, not a replica of something they think they know that was once and somewhere else.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, the accommodations really aren't that much. I mean, and now don't be biased against your own opinion, Brittany, right? Because I keep thinking, I mean, this is my life, right? And so is it really not that hard, or is it just because it's part of your world? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think, okay, so how hard is it to write a schedule? It's not hard. And in fact, I'm literally the laziest person on the planet. I make a schedule, and then I put it on my computer for my kids with autism. I do it for myself too, but I put it on my computer. And then when the next time or the next job or the next whatever happens, I literally cut and paste and put it into a clear plastic protector. It is not hard, right? And that is me being 60 years old and not techie. There are amazing schedule option apps, amazing, that are free. So,
and you talked about natural supports too, Brittany. Like just coworkers, it just happens naturally. And all of those things don't cost the employer anything.
Yeah.
So paying attention to that.
Well, it's just like you and I mean, we think about, what's in future Brittany's best interest today. Well, my best interest is to go and get some Mucinex and then go back home, right? But if I didn't think about future Brittany, I would get home with no Mucinex. So the goal is to teach the individual about their future needs and what that day looks like. Right? So identifying what are my time robbers and what are my time savers. Feels like we could have a really nice conversation about accommodations.
Maybe we'll have to do a follow-up.
Yeah, I could use that tip without even, that's a great tip.
Be kind of fun.
So I think I have one final takeaway message for us today in this conversation. What would your takeaway from this be? What is the one thing you'd like us to know, and for Vicki and I, that we could potentially share with other employers who are looking at hiring individuals with autism?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest takeaway would be what do you need for your business, and how does a person with autism, how do those strengths feed into your need base, right? So that there's so many more strengths than there are needs for autistic individuals. And kind of like what you said, Heidi, about the biases of what people think autism is, and that has so much improved. And honestly, in my 30-year, almost 40-year career, that is the biggest thing that's changed, is just understanding what autism is and isn't. The people used to say to me, oh, it's because they're artistic. I'm like, what? Like they confuse the R with the U, right? Anyway, so that's been a really big change. So I think we're on a really good positive trajectory about employee and employer understanding. So I hope.
So too.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. We only went over by 5.5 minutes.
Totally okay. Well, we will have this posted on our West Meets East channel on YouTube for people to go back and watch if they're interested. We will be having another West Meets East conversation coming up on Wednesday, May 27th, 9 a.m. Mountain, 10 a.m. Central. We will be joined by Kelsey Stein, who is going to kind of come and talk to us about disabilities and tourism, since we're going into that fun time of the year for South Dakota. And we hope you can join us. Thank you for participating today. And Brittany, thank you so much for being here with us. We are definitely going to have you back, because this could be a conversation that Vicki and I could listen to forever. Right, Vicki?
Yes, great job. Thank you so much, Brittany. Thank you all for attending.
Yes,
Have a
thank you
great
everyone
day.
for coming.
Make today a good day.
You too.